My premise here is that our institutions, our culture, and our law are actually not responding very well.
We are in a very perilous situation. And I think actually people use the 1950s as a landmark. I think that what's going on now is worse.
Courts are ruling against this administration as they ruled against the prior administration. What many people say they believe is not working is that it's not producing the results that they want. But I don't see any evidence that this system is failing.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around for this panel, The State of Free Speech in America. We've got a lot to talk about. Joining me today are two preeminent scholars, legal scholars, intellectuals, commentators, the great Randall Kennedy. Please join me, the Michael R. Klein Professor at Harvard Law School. And with us, Jonathan Turley, the J.B. and Maurice C. Shapiro Professor of Public Interest Law at GW Law. So here's the little plan that I think we're going to go for. I'm going to lay out some what I like to call the factual predicate, or at least it's my opinion, of the state of free speech in America. Invite you all to use that as a jumping off point to tell me, and then we'll go from there. I'll be candid. I think the state of free speech is at its worst that it has been in the modern free speech era. I basically don't think it's been this bad since the 1950s. Why do I think that? I think that the main sites of free expression, of information creation, of knowledge dissemination are all under immense strain. Our speech culture, our speech institutions, and our free speech law is all struggling to cope right now. I'm gonna lay out a couple examples on the government suppression side, as well as picking up on the last panel, the sort of private threats to speech. On the government side, we're seeing attacks on universities, right? Threatening to terminate university funding, threats of arrest and deportation, to suppress speech on campus, in particular pro-Palestinian speech. Vanderbilt was on the list of the of invitees to the Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education, which I fear is basically asking universities to trade academic freedom for increased funding. And we're seeing threats of civil rights investigations increase. We have government jawboning of media companies. There were obviously credible allegations of this under the Biden administration, and we are seeing similar issues today, the most obvious one being Brendan Carr's jawboning of ABC. We're seeing threats of criminal and tax penalties against, at the moment, leftist organizations, right? Designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, a White House memorandum to find and root out leftist and liberal organizations that are purportedly funding political violence, but of which the Soros Foundation was, quote, a likely candidate for such penalties, and deploying the military, including masked agents in our cities. By my list, we have LA, DC, Memphis, Chicago, Portland, New Orleans, and Baltimore that are currently having deployments or that are on the list for near deployments. On the private threat side, we've heard a lot already today about the siloed and algorithmically determined information streams that we are all subject to. The rise of adverse employment actions for speech, right? So people being fired for a social media post or being canceled for their speech. A culture of intimidation, especially on university campuses. The right has long, I think correctly, been upset about a sort of leftist orthodoxy in the classroom, but we are also seeing intimidation on university campuses coming from the right now. And finally, a rise in defamation lawsuits, major defamation lawsuits. Some of them have already been mentioned. $1 million settlements with media companies, both now by Trump, but we also had the Fox Dominion lawsuit several years ago. We have justices thinking about reexamining New York Times v. Sullivan. Okay, I just threw out a lot, but I wanted us to have a real concrete sense of the multi-sided threats. So let me start with the broad question, and then we can get narrower. Like I said, my premise here is that our institutions, our culture, and our law are actually not responding very well to these multi-sided threats. Please tell me I'm wrong. Randall first, and then Jonathan, I would love you to respond.
Unfortunately, you are not being an alarmist. We are in a very perilous situation. And I think actually people use the 1950s as a landmark. I think that what's going on now is worse. We've never seen the executive branch take actions like this executive branch has taken. We've never seen the government, the federal government, act with such brazen disregard for fundamental procedural protections. And so, no, you're not. You weren't exaggerating. This is a terrible moment. I do think that to get, to be realistic, we need to face very straightforwardly the threats that are out there. We also, it seems to me, at every moment need to be attentive to the resistance. It's true that we are facing terrible threats. It's true that the government, and when I say the government, I mean the Congress, some of the ways in which, for instance, the Fox committee acted towards the universities, those weren't hearings, those were persecutions. The way that the Justice Department is acting, the way the White House is acting, as far as I'm concerned, terrible. It is worth noting, though, that people are resisting, and I think in settings like this, it's worthwhile noting there are people here who have been here for over the past 2 days and are here after a long day. There are organizations, I'm part of an organization, the National Coalition of Censorship, FIRE, obviously, the ACLU. There are others across the ideological spectrum who are rallying, and that needs to be recognized. And we need to support and applaud the efforts at resistance coming all across the political spectrum. That's part of our situation too. So while we have threats, we also have resistance.
Great. Jonathan?
Well, I think I come to this with a bit of a different perspective than both of you. First of all, I've been very critical of the Trump administration on many of the things on your list of grievances. As my students will tell you, I haven't liked a president since James Madison. But, in the free speech community, we're used to having uncertain allies. We rarely have allies after they become president. But what surprises me is how your list is so conspicuously recent. We just finished an administration under President Biden that had the largest censorship system in the history of this country. It was a coalition of corporate, academic, media, and government efforts. Those of us who testified in Congress to try to expose that were met with an entire shutdown of denial. It was only after Musk released the Twitter files that it was undeniable that we had hundreds and thousands of emails showing coordination with these different groups, including many academic groups. For the people who were censored and blacklisted and fired for years. They would not share your view that suddenly this is worse than that. And one of the reasons I wanted to emphasize that is that, you know, we are living through what I've called an age of rage. And the problem with ages of rage, as I talk about in my book, The Indispensable Right, is that, you know, this country is born in rage. And rage rhetoric has been with us. That's what the Boston Tea Party was. It was an act of rage. The danger of ages of rage is when the government uses rage rhetoric to shut down dissent. We've seen that in every administration in my lifetime. But there are some positive things happening, which is what surprises me with some of your comments and some of Randy's comments. I think that the Trump administration has done some positive things. They are more transparent. They are going toe-to-toe with the EU, which I consider to be one of the greatest threats to free speech today. They are opposing the Digital Services Act. From those of us in the free speech community that have spent years fighting the EU, we have never had an ally in the US government, and that is a very important thing. I was just in Prague talking about free speech. Actually, right before my speech, I learned that my friend Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. And it's an odd thing when you talk about an age of rage and find out that someone you know was murdered. But the most chilling aspect of it was not a bit surprising. That's what happens with rage. It gives you a license to do things and say things you would not ordinarily do or say. And it also gives you a certain convenient memory block. You know, every generation believes that it has this dangerous conceit that its problems are unprecedented and that we have to make changes. I do not agree with Randy that the system is not working. I don't agree with your comment on that either. To me, this system has been stress tested throughout its history. It's the most stable, successful constitutional system in the history of the world. And it is working. Courts are ruling against this administration as they ruled against the prior administration. What many people say they believe is not working is that it's not producing the results that they want. But I don't see any evidence that this system is failing. And when it comes to Congress, this is the manifestation of democracy. We're a divided country, for God's sake. And when we are divided, less gets done. That's because we have representatives in Congress that advance the interest of their voters. And so I don't think that's a failure of the system. You know, eventually we will come together. Eventually we'll overcome this division. We've done it in the past. But for now, we are divided and less gets done.
Could I say something?
Please.
I would agree that we have to take a long view and that the struggle for freedom, including freedom of speech, freedom to read, freedom to teach, that's going to be a perpetual struggle because power, no matter where the power is, if I were president, there would be a problem with power. We have to have limits on power. It's always a threat. And so my colleague is right when he says that there have been threats, you know, in other eras. Absolutely, there have been threats in other eras, and we should be attentive to that. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that what's going on now is absolutely unprecedented. So, you know, the attack on the law firms, absolutely unprecedented. And the response was disappointing. The response by lawyers, or at least a certain sector of the bar. There is a substantial sector of the bar that responded, as far as I'm concerned, well. But there is a part of the bar that capitulated in a way that they will come to rue, capitulated to the Trump administration in a way that should make everybody in here, because everybody in here at some point is probably going to need a lawyer for something, and the way in which the Trump administration threatened you're right, they were clear. They were clear. So we have a president of the United States who explicitly went after law firms because these law firms had employed lawyers, including lawyers who were simply serving as prosecutors, for goodness sakes, but he was going to use his office to punish them. I have never, give me an example of that in American history. I've never seen an example in American history of the White House going after institutions of higher education, not just a professor here, a professor there, institutions of higher education, like this White House is going after my institution and others. So it's true that we have to always be on guard, but it's also true that right now there is a peril that is unprecedented in modern American history.
Can I respond to that?
Make my job easy.
First of all, these are all excellent points. The problem is, once again, there's a certain memory hole here, which seems very deep. Do you want examples in history? Of course. I mean, we've had examples in history. I mean, the Adams-Jefferson period, they weren't just talking like they wanted to kill each other. They were actually trying to kill each other. That's what the Alien and Sedition Acts were. But when you talk about it's totally unprecedented, it's once again, we tend to have this rather myopic view of free speech. I went through years of watching people I know get fired by law firms. There was a complete crusade on the left from the Lincoln Project, and dozens of Republican lawyers were forced out of law firms, told they could not represent Republican causes. And what concerns me is that many of my friends, and I consider Randy a friend, and I also have respect for Randy. I'm not saying that he is anti-free speech. He's not. He's been a great voice for the rule of law. But most of my friends in the academy didn't say a damn thing when people were being canceled, blacklisted, when, basically faculties around the country purged their faculties over the last 20 years. Surveys done of faculty show that many don't have a single Republican, or less than 5% in a country that is over 50% Republican or libertarian. Nobody objected to that. That wasn't a problem. And so I've been a big critic, as Randy knows. We had a debate at Harvard Law School, which I think very substantive and very civil. But I've been a critic of Harvard and its hiring practices and the questions of intellectual diversity at Harvard. But I was one of the first to object to the measures against Harvard. I don't want the government involved with that. But it also ignores that there's legitimate objections here to the way higher education now goes from either the left to the far left. It's different from when I joined the academy 30 years ago. But if you want, the problem is when you ask for examples of how people are being denied protections, or being forced out of their positions, I can give you a hell of a lot of them. And the reason the Biden administration didn't go after universities is universities were the allies of the Biden administration. Higher education is largely left to far left, and they were part of the censorship system, and they worked hand in glove with the Biden administration. Of course, there wasn't a lot of confrontation between them. The Biden administration was delighted with higher education.
Well, let me ask you this, and feel free to keep responding. But let me just bring in the role of law in all of this. So to pick out a couple of things, you've mentioned, Jonathan, some things that you're pleased about, some diplomatic efforts. You mentioned testifying to Congress, but you've also mentioned, and both of you, that oftentimes it's government itself that is either not doing something or doing something through its ample legal mechanisms. We're 3 law professors, 3 lawyers on stage, so I'd be remiss not to say, we can be upset about the culture and the functioning of certain private institutions in particular. what can be the role of law, and can there be the role of law in helping to address some of the pathologies on both sides that you all are concerned about?
Well, we do have the role of law being manifested. The attacks on law firms failed in the courts. Now, some law firms agreed to these very ambiguous settlements about what they would do in the future, but the law firms that went to court prevailed. And those values were vindicated. And, the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled against this president. I expect in the coming term that is rapidly approaching, they will rule against the administration again. The rule of law hasn't died in this country. What I think is that dangerous conceit is that people are saying, well, it's not happening fast enough. Look at him, it's not deterring him. He's not the first president to do this. I mean, the presidents have historically taken just outrageous positions. Barack Obama issued the kill list policy and said that he could kill an American citizen anywhere at any time if he decided they were a terrorist. And I don't remember a lot of my colleagues standing up and saying, my God, this is a constitutional crisis. He then went to Congress and told them, you didn't pass the immigration laws and environmental laws I insisted on, so I'm going to go at it alone. I'm going to unilaterally enact that. I didn't see people jumping up saying, my God, what's going to happen to our Constitution? Our courts are failing. That's the bias that I see. I haven't liked any of these presidents. I just don't recognize the people that are standing up now, because I didn't see any of them over the last 4 years.
On the question of the rule of law, the Federalist Society, conservative group, begins, they begin their meetings, every meeting I've been to, they begin their meetings by saying, we are a group of conservative/libertarian students, and we believe in, and they give I think it's a very good thing that they do. They mention 3 things. First, limited government. Hallelujah. We ought to go back and embrace limited government in the face of an executive that doesn't seem to be attentive at all to limits. Second, division of powers, executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch, not just one branch taking over everything, but some degree of self-imposed limitation, recognizing the usefulness of a division of labor within governmental operations. Third, transparency. My point is, and I'm not conservative. I'm a person on the left. But I think that these certain conservative precepts have proven themselves and are very useful. And I think it's a part of the peril of the moment is that these foundational precepts are being trampled and people are not championing them. And these are precepts, it seems to me, that, again, people all over the ideological spectrum should be championing.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. Let's talk about rage and hypocrisy for a second, because actually in both of your answers, there's a little bit of they did it first, or of they did it first, or they're doing it worse, or no one stood up for me when it happened this time. And I know you're both also scholars of history, and we know that these are vicious cycles that just build on one another. We are at a point where the rage is high, very high, violent even. How can we recover a culture of a healthy culture of free speech? So it's less about the free. I mean, we need it to be free, but it has to be healthy in order for free speech to actually do the role of free speech. How do we forgive? And even if it's true, that even if the grievances are true, how do we move past them? You want to start, Jonathan?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have a lot of faith that we're going to move past them. I mean, my book talks about all the ages we've been through. We've come out of those ages. We have eventually moved beyond our divisions. And we have been through, my disagreement with Randy is that we have been here before. It's very familiar. In fact, many of the same voices you hear today were heard back then. The people that are saying, let's censor disinformation, and it's too dangerous to allow some people to speak. There's nothing new to those people. We've heard those voices throughout the history of this country, and we've rejected them. But the thing that will bring us back together, I think, is something that rests deeply within each of us. I have a book coming out for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence called Rage in the Republic. And the book talks about, half of the book is looking backwards at the American Revolution, half is looking forward at whether this American democracy can survive in the 21st century. And I quote this Frenchman who is known as Farmer John. And he came to this country and he wrote an amazing essay that was very popular in Europe. It was read primarily in Europe. And he asked this question in all earnest, and he asked, what is this American? And he meant it because Europeans viewed us as sort of almost a new species of citizen. They were fascinated by what is this American? And he spoke in glowing terms about us almost clinically, as something that had come to the world anew. We have to rediscover what this American is, what we have in common. And I think that we will. This is an age of rage, but it won't last. It's a fever, but it'll break. And we have come together in the past, and I think we will in the future. But free speech will be essential to the survival of this democracy in the problems that we are about to face. Those problems are unprecedented, and we will need free speech more than any other right if we will survive it.
I hope that you're correct in your suggestion that where we are now is actually not that much different than where we've been in the past, and that I'm being an alarmist. I sincerely hope that you are correct. I fear that you are not correct. But to answer your question directly, on the question, how do we unspool this? I'm happy to recognize mistakes, errors, misjudgments, mischievous actions in the past by others, Democrats, liberals, radicals. Happy to do that. And will sincerely do that. I think that is actually essential to do, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, they too used their management of government funds vis-a-vis the universities. They didn't do it to the extent that this administration's doing it, but they did it, and perhaps gave hints of what could be done. And so that was a bad thing. I think people need to recognize that, and recognize that sincerely. On the issue of how are we going to get out of this, trust is going to be essential, and trust is going to be very difficult to secure, extremely difficult to secure. Freedom of speech, absolutely essential, But I think it was Mr. Woods in the previous gathering who made, I thought, the very important point that speech, as essential as it is, it's absolutely essential, gotta have it, but it's not sufficient to get us to where we need to be. And for that, we're going to need not only free speech, but we're going to need the sentiments that help bind us together as a decent collectivity. How we're gonna have to do all of that? Well, I hope we can have another summit that has been as good as this one and as useful as this one, and bring together people to focus on that. But I think that that is going to be required to create the sort of society where people actually do have trust and can, proceed to where we need to go to have a more decent, a more flourishing society.
That's great. I'm going to take moderator's privilege for the last word and make a confession, which is that I'm a proud student of Randall's here. He taught me about the civil rights movement. And I actually I remember to this day, I asked you a version of this question in class. It was basically, I said, I don't get how it stayed relatively nonviolent. You taught me all about the conditions on the ground, and I just don't get how people devoted themselves to making the country better in a non-violent way. How? And part of your answer was strategy. It was too costly to do otherwise. And so I'll just say that I think we need to make the price of division more costly. Please join me in thanking these two phenomenal scholars.